Hello, everyone. You must have come across the term called software release notes. Release notes is the document which communicates new features, changes to your software product with your stakeholders. And if it is written well, it can be a very good tool to increase your customer loyalty, nurture engagement, and many other benefits. Hi, I'm Sujeet Pathak. I'm a senior product manager at Amoeboids, Atlassian Platinum Marketplace partner. And I welcome you to this first episode of our new podcast series that we are starting today, Release Notes, the Expert's Perspective. In this series, we'll dive into the world of release notes and the expert will speak with the experts behind them. Today, we have with us Pema Sherpa. She's a senior technical writer at LinkedIn. She has a decade-long career in the field of technical writing, and she has worked with many leading companies. Hi, Pema, and very warm welcome to you on this session. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sujeet, for having me. Really excited to be here and be able to share my learnings with you.
Great. So, before we start with our actual topic of the day, that is release notes, I would like to know about your professional journey in general, like, what got you into the world of technical writing?
Okay. So I will be very honest. When I started my technical writing journey, I was not very keen on pursuing this career because, I am from a media background. I studied communication at my master's level. So, the job opportunities available to me at that time were something related to media. But of course, the reason why I even chose this field of study was because I love writing. So ever since I was a child and in school, I've always, been a part of the writing teams. So, that was something I wanted to pursue. But in my college, when the placement started happening and a huge multinational company came to hire technical writers, I just gave it a shot blindly. It wasn't even something that I was very serious about. But when I got in, I thought like, let me give it a chance because, at that point, we're talking 10 years, 11 years from now, there was a huge IT boom in the country. And being in Bangalore, there were multiple opportunities to work in IT field. So I saw my future there. So I thought like, let me give it a shot. But honestly, looking back, it's been about like 11 years into this same profession. And I have not been regretful even for a single day because every day I'm learning new things. And I've been very fortunate, in fact, to be a part of different types of companies. So when I started off, I was in a very typical traditional big multinational company, which had like 30, 40 technical writers across the globe. And, I learned from the best, I would say, because they had like very strict technical writing guidelines and there was like proper processes in place. So, I could start learning from ground up. But as I moved along in my profession, I joined startups, and that's where, my test of, my skills actually was, put in forth. And then I feel like that's where, I got more and more hands-on with the product development process and to really start using, the products that I was writing about as well. So all in all, my journey's been great. I think, now finally being at LinkedIn, I know that, all these years of experience has really come to its full use with the kind of work I'm doing. I'm heavily right now into developer documentation. There's like only 20% of UI based, graphical interface based products that we document. But, it's a truly exciting time to be in technical writing.
Great to know that. I can relate to that point that you mentioned when you transition from a bigger organization to a startup. It's completely a different world. So even I have experienced that thing. So I can definitely relate to that. So, like you mentioned, you've been into this for last 11 years now. So what are the notable changes that you have seen in the technical writing space over the years?
Yeah, I mean, this is a very interesting question, and I'm glad we're getting into this at the beginning of the session itself, because, I think it clears a lot of doubts that people have in their minds as well about technical writing as such, right? Even today, when, I've been a part of different organizations, I still have to explain what a technical writer is supposed to do. A lot of people are in the dark about this role because, there's not much awareness about it. And also that if you look at the institutions and universities today in India, not there's no formal course where technical writing is taught. So because of all these reasons, I feel like it's a challenge for people to relate to technical writing. So when I started my journey, like I said, I started from a very big company learning the basics of technical writing. So there I felt two things. One is the nature of the content itself. It was more structured, and it was very how do I say, there were certain do's and don'ts in place, which we had to follow. There were norms, there were style guides that needed to be adhered to. In fact, we had this great, technical editor. Her job was to just edit the technical writer's work, and she was the one who brought in the quality and made sure we followed all the rules that were there laid out for technical writers. So, coming from a very traditional background, I saw like a very different world where, it was slightly restrictive. The writing itself was, like you had to stick to a certain number of characters in the, what do you call, the leading sentence and things like that. Worked in a heavily data, adopted kind of an ecosystem. So I saw that very structured way of writing. And along with that, as time passed, I think even in the software development world, people started building products differently. And the same reflected in technical writing as well. So going from like a very traditional way of creating software to something like, like the REST API world, right? Where everything is connected through the APIs, and you really don't even need to have an infrastructure in place. You just do plug and play, and, you're up and running. So when that kind of transition happened, I was like in the industry doing technical writing, and I saw that, like people now expected you to move along faster with them, which meant you can't be like being so picky about what you're writing. It's more about just shipping things. And when that happens, as a technical writer, I think my role was also challenged technically as well, wherein, I was not only just sitting behind the laptop and doing the writing job, but I was also participating in even like testing out the APIs, right? So like I mentioned, in one of the startups I worked in, I was their first technical writer. There was absolutely no documentation strategy there, and I helped build processes. And that's where, one of the things that I also had to do is try out the APIs myself. So when that happened, I felt like, what was happening is technical writer's role had increased manifold. So you were not only someone who was fed the information, but you had to extract the information as well as try the product yourself, set up everything by yourself, and be an SME yourself. So, I can see the transition from how things are much more slightly more structured, and now how things are more fluid, and the role has really become expansive for a technical writer. And thirdly, I feel like, again, this is with the evolution of the technology world itself, right? Like where the knowledge of APIs has become super critical for a technical writer. In fact, I feel fortunate that, when I joined this startup, they only were building APIs. So I literally had to learn from scratch, but it gave me a hands-on knowledge of it. So when that happened, I feel like, my role as a technical writer was also evolving, and the API documentation knowledge was something that I could add to my experience as well. So overall, I feel like technical writing has grown a lot, and with AI ML coming into picture, it's only becoming more and more exciting. And it's not to say that it's less important, or I see the progression as being more and more like an opportunity to learn more and grow with the industry and not be obsolete or irrelevant.
That's quite a comprehensive way to explain this. And the point that you mentioned about the APIs, yeah, I completely agree with you, because even my journey, like I'm not into technical writing, but I have also kind of completed similar number of years in my field, 11, 12 years now. And what I've seen is that, more than often these days, I'm end up reading the API documents, because in the SaaS cloud-based products, you cannot be standalone product. You have to integrate with other tools, and then you have to do those integration via APIs. And the API documentation is the first gateway when you start doing that. So yeah, that's a important thing to note. Any budding technical writers who are just entering into this field, API is the one of the things that you will end up working more than often with this. So now coming to our topic of this discussion, that is release notes, right? So release notes are something like I explained in the intro, that they are the documents which you generate at the time of releases in your software product, and they generally communicate what are the changes that you are going to do with this release, or what are the new features that you are releasing, any bug fixes that you have done. And release notes could be for different stakeholders, not just your customers, but they could be for your internal stakeholders as well as your external stakeholders. So when you draft a release note document, how do you determine what information should be included in a release notes document?
That's a great question again. So for me, I've had different styles of working for release notes in different companies, because again, you have to understand the pulse of every company and how development teams work, right? So I don't think there's a one size fits all solution when it comes to even creating processes and working with your stakeholders as a technical writer. So in my experience, what I see is that, I feel like when we work with release notes, we always should make sure that, we are very closely following the development process, right? So the question was around how do we ensure like what content should go in,
Yes.
right? So for that, obviously, you'll be a part of the, let's say, like in my experience, I've worked in sprint. So let's say you're working in a particular sprint and there are a bunch of candidates that are going in for that release. So, I work with mostly the QA team where, I feel that is, I mean, I've also worked with developers directly and even project managers, program managers who are responsible for making sure that the release happens on time. But the release candidates to get more information about what exactly is that feature, what bug fix does this mean, or if I have any follow-up questions, in my experience, and this is like a sort of a tip to all technical writers or budding technical writers, is that QAs, I feel, are much more, first of all, they are much more available, because developers, once they build the product, like they get on to something else, and they're always the ones who are deep into their work, and it's somehow very difficult to find time with them. Whereas QAs are slightly more, I feel like they're more welcoming, and they have more a little bit more leisure of time to spend with you and break things down for you. Like as a technical writer, you need to understand it from very, very basic level.
Right.
So having time with the QA really helps. So I start off with building a rapport with the QA such that once the QA gives a sign off saying that these are the features that are tested, and mostly it comes with a Jira ticket, right? So every feature will have a Jira. So there'll be a bunch of, there's like, let's say there's a draft created by the QA team having all the Jiras that will be released in that particular sprint. So I work with that. One of the things I also like the QA to do is to mark whether that change is internal or external. And of course, in my review, I'll also be able to tell whether something looks like an internal config change, which means, we don't need to add that to our external release notes. So that those candidates gets marked at the time of the draft building itself. But once that is ready, normally typical time frame for me is like within 2 weeks of the release is when the list should be finalized, right? So that we have like all the preparations from the marketing team, the marketing communication team prepares its own communication, etc., and even the docs start getting finalized. So by that time we have the complete list. We clearly mark what is internal and external. Internal is always retained for the company. Of course, external would be a part of that, so we can call that as V1 of the release note, which is maintained internally. Same thing with external candidates is translated into the release notes, and then that is published on the day of the release. Additionally, on the day of the release, we also make this internal release notes available for internal developers. Like you mentioned, there are different types of consumers of the release notes.
Okay, so like you mentioned, you already segregating them as an internal and external, and then based on that. So just want to deep dive into this a little bit more, like, who writes the V1 of those releases? Let's say I have 5 features to be released in this release. So there are 5 stories in Jira for the 5 features, right? So for those 5 stories, who writes the first cut of the release notes? What should go into that, release notes for that particular story? So do you write it yourself, or you ask those developers or QA members to write the first cut of the thing, and then refresh them into more polished version later on?
Right. So I have worked in all these different ways. So one is where I take the Jira list. They are just giving me the list of Jiras, right? The QA has tested these and they are passed. They're going to be released. And every Jira will have at least the title and description. So it's easy for you to tell what that change means. If there is additional clarity you need, you will go back to the developer or QA, clarify and create the version. So that's one way in which I feel like a technical writer can get involved. The other one is where, this is what is happening. I feel like I'm fortunate to be a part of this team where the developers are very proactive and they themselves they put entry into the release notes, which is the draft version. And I rework on that based on like, what is the language change, if there is more information that's required. For example, if we can say that there is a blog link that we can add, for more information. So things like that, it gets further refined by me.
Okay, I got it. So, I think you also answered my next question with your previous answer as well. Like I was going to ask you about how you integrate the release notes process in the product, your release management process. So you already explained that quite a bit. So, like we discussed earlier, release notes can be consumed by your internal stakeholder, your external stakeholders. So anyone who is reading those release notes, not necessarily they would be, uh, some users who are technical in nature, some are who are non-technical in nature. And more than often in software releases, there could be some technical things that are mentioned in the release notes, right? So how do you make sure, that your release notes are easily understandable to both like technical users as well as non-technical users?
Yeah, that's a very valid question because, there's so much out there. And even in our, not only the release notes, I feel this is relevant even in the other content that a technical writer
Right.
creates, things like, user guides and manuals,
Yes.
how to differentiate, how do you cater to the two different types of audiences. So in release notes, actually, it's very easy. Why? Because, you can actually create this differentiation at the title level itself. So when you give very clear titles or categories to the release notes, it implies to whom it is directed towards. So for example, in a typical release notes, if you see, there would be a new features section, right? So the title itself talks about what are the new features that have been added, which means it is most likely going to be referred by, let's say, a product owner or, someone who is in the marketing field based on the kind of company or the product you are building for, but mostly the non-technical audience, versus something like a bug fixes section where you'll be listing out all the bug fixes that have gone in and stuff like that. So I feel at that level itself, we are creating some kind of segregation between the technical and non-technical content. Further, the other part is also segregating the release notes based on the product, right? So some of the products that people are offering as a part of their solutions may have a very clear demarcation between what is a developer heavy tool versus something that is done by the admin or the user, right? So when you have a release note broken down into those categories, again, they will intuitively know that this relates to me because this is a developer product versus this is a business user product. And further, one of the things that I checked is that HubSpot is one of the very commonly used examples in when it comes to release notes, where what they have done as the strategy is like they have two ways of like showcasing the release notes items. One is in the category of all updates and the other is the feature updates. So if you are a person who is only interested to know the features, because for them the end user is a marketing guy, right? So for him, he needs to know what are the new features that they can use. So he would most likely go ahead and check only the feature updates, and then someone like a like a developer or a technical person would most likely look into the all updates section. So I feel like that's one of the ways to tackle it, because I think release notes, again, at the end of the day, it's supposed to be crisp. It's supposed to be very to the point. So these sections are super, super useful to bring out the maximum value out of release notes.
Oh, that's a great insight, even for me personally, because in our organization, we don't have a dedicated technical writer as such. So I am actually helping our team to write and publish release notes. So for me as well, that's a great insight. The HubSpot example that you mentioned, I'm definitely going to get a look at it. So, we do this practice release notes for every release. So maybe you have 15 days or a monthly release. Every release you keep on publishing release notes. How do you measure, whether those release notes are, bearing any fruit? They are making sense to your intended audiences. How do you measure the success of your release notes?
Okay. I think most companies have implemented some form of feedback mechanism across their documentation, not only just the release notes. So you can utilize that itself. In fact, I feel like, again, looking back at the journey I've had, companies are becoming more and more innovative with gathering feedback from their users, right? So I've seen companies where, their change log page or their release notes page has like a reaction. Either it's a smiley, or you give like a neutral reaction or a sad face. So it's kind of becoming more and more interactive to encourage your users to come back with feedback. So one is obviously a quantitative analytics you can run via these kind of tools, where you're collecting just like binary, right? A thumbs up, thumbs down, those kind of options that shows some level of success in the effort you have put. The other one could probably be, again, like just a comment box, or like a feedback mechanism where they can actually leave comments, full sentences to tell you more about what they feel about it. That would be on the qualitative side of the feedback. And then obviously you can also run things like a survey, a regular survey. I see that happening a lot in my company, because we are a very developer focused company, right? We want to be engaged with our developers all the time. So as and when the marketing teams and our DevRel teams, they reach out to our developers, they also make sure that they collect feedback on the documentation and the release notes. So you can, silently slip in one question that sort of helps you understand where you stand with your audiences. Additionally, I think one of the other ways is to always be on top of things is just make sure that you are in touch with your support tickets, right? I mean, just make sure how many issues are being raised that you can fix in the release notes, via the release notes, or even documentation in general. So that will also tell you whether you're doing well or not, because people normally what they do is they reach out to support all the time for any issue, be it documentation or even technical stuff. So I feel like being in that pipeline all the time to make sure that you are aware of what people are talking about in terms of your release notes is helpful as well.
Okay, so you mentioned about that support ticket, keeping track of that. One question that comes to my mind, even from my own experience, I have experience like many times, though we try to include as much as information as possible in the form of release notes or help documentation, but people more than often end up not reading everything there and just creating support tickets for that same info that we already have. So with this, one question that comes to my mind is what can be done from our side as a technical writer when we create those documentation or release notes, so that people are more engaged while reading them and don't lose out interest and just create a ticket out of that.
Yeah, I think you answered it yourself, right? Like the term here to focus on is engaging content. So with our effort to make the content more and more engaging through maybe use of not only text, but something that, arises interest. People should be interested to look at your content, right? So use of maybe screenshots or any kind of media, and even like, interactive elements, like they should be able to give you feedback via a certain interesting option. I think those will encourage people to participate. And other than that, like you mentioned, about the support tickets, to be honest, it's a very it's a very natural thing for people to easily reach out to support, right? And that's a behavior that exists not only in the case of documentation, but across all the customer facing touch points. So the first instinct is for people to just create a support ticket. And then again, like, that's fine. I don't think that's really bad, because you are getting feedback somewhere. I think it's important to have a pipeline where such feedback reaches you. And obviously, like from your side, whatever you can do in the content to make sure that it's engaging. And like one of the things that I also see while I worked in API documentation is that today we are using more and more interactive elements in our documentation, like like API playground. That's one thing that is super, super useful. There are lots of tools out there that uses YAML and Swagger, Open API spec to create an experience within the documentation where people are not just coming there to read pages and pages of information, but they are actually getting a chance to try out an API through that API playground of sorts. So I think if you do that, I feel like people are going to be more and more interested. And I wouldn't promise that the support tickets will go down. Like I said, people love just throwing a mail to the company, but at least from your side, you are doing your bit to add maximum value.
Yeah, that's a great point. Being more and more interactive, and help people to do stuff live instead of just reading those long paragraphs of the text. That always helps. So in the process of generation of release notes, drafting those release note documents, sometimes you have to maintain multiple copies or in the different formats. Like you have a release note being sent over an email, stored in a form of a PDF or in a Confluence documentation space. So do you use any particular tool to manage the whole process of generation of release notes? Just to give a idea about this, like we at Amoeboids, we have a tool called automated release notes for Jira. So that tool, what it does is it's an add-on for Jira, where it helps people to automate the whole process of generation and distribution of release notes in different formats, and then distribute them in different channels as well. So do you use any such a kind of a tool for management of release notes?
No, so far I have not used any tool that auto-generates release notes, but I think it's a very useful thing to have, given that, as a technical writer, you're literally working with so many stakeholders, and sometimes it is too manual to sort of put everything together. So I'm definitely open to that idea, and I feel it's a great great thing to incorporate in your release documentation.
Okay. Of late, Pema, everyone is hooked to ChatGPT, right? It's a revolutionary tool, and even I myself find myself of late, like whenever I want to do anything, like write anything or generate release notes, I take help from ChatGPT. So, do you think the AI-based tools like ChatGPT are kind of a threat to the technical writing profession?
You won't believe, I have been following this topic and it's been popping everywhere on my LinkedIn feed.
Yes.
About how the job of writers, and especially technical writers, is at stake and everything. So I use the tool myself, and of course, I mean, I think it's great in terms of just having that flow in place. And for technical writers, when you are sometimes in that writer's block, right, where you're trying to form a sentence in a certain way and it's not coming out, those tools are super effective, and it helps you ease the kind of burden that's there on you creatively. But on the other hand, looking at, the overall requirement of a technical writer in a company, I feel that all the roles that we play, this is just one part of it. The actual writing is in fact 20% of what we do. We are working with developers, we are interacting with product managers, we are following up with releases, we are also understanding the product. So the collaboration part, the human element that comes in, is something I feel is irreplaceable by any kind of chat platform, or AI for that matter, because the contextual part is missing when you bring in just
Right.
like tool, right? So I feel like it's not going to replace, but it's going to assist, definitely. In fact, I have started growing fond of it, and I think like there are a lot of things there which are relevant in terms of like if I need a specific help, I feel that a lot of relevant content is being surfaced. So I truly enjoyed writing it, and I feel like it's a new revolution to technical writing, but I don't believe that it will replace technical writing.
That's great. Yeah, I also feel that even in my profession as a product manager, I sometimes feel threatened by it, because I have actually used it to write specifications of my requirements or product requirement documents and everything. But again, like you mentioned, the contextual part is missing. So you can take an help from it, but it's not going to replace you altogether, because there are other parts, the human part of the process that you are involved in, right? Personally, which
So,
that we cannot do at the moment.
yeah, and also if you look at the role a technical writer plays, right, I would like to call it as like a gatekeeper of information. So what happens over a period of time is, as a technical writer, you are updating the content regularly by release documentation, or even bug fixes, or any kind of new enhancements that we keep adding to the documentation, right? So over a period of time, there is a sort of like a, you become a custodian of information. And if you have something like a chat platform sort of replacing you, then if in the absence of a gatekeeper, there would be a lot of conflicts. If you give the onus then to the developers to directly update the
Right.
docs, then there is no one to make sure that there is no duplication of content, or there is even a strategy behind where a certain information should lie in the table of contents and things like that. So I think the role of a technical writer here is more of like someone who ensures that there is a continuous management, and like a well thought out strategy behind how the documentation should appear in the best interest of the end user, which I obviously is not possible through just chat GPT.
Correct. All right. So, Pema, we, as means I'm considering myself as a part of your community, because I'm doing some part of it, like writing release notes. So we do this thing over the period, and but at the same time, it is also necessary that it is accessible and discoverable to the intended audience. So whatever the documentation or release notes that we are generating, they should be easily discoverable for the intended audience. So how do you make sure that your release notes or the help documentation is easily accessible, discoverable to the intended audience that that are there?
Right. Of course, there are multiple ways to do this. How do you make sure that your release notes reaches to your intended audience? But one thing that I feel has worked really well in my experience in the companies I've worked with is a personal touch, which happens through emails, right? So in fact, we've also, in one of the companies I worked with, we even went ahead and for all those special customers or customers who we thought were like regularly sort of using our products, we sent them specific emails with the link to the release notes as and when the release happened, and we saw a lot of positive feedback there. So if you could do that, where you are sending out emails, we do that at LinkedIn as well. In fact, our developer community is very active. So as and when the releases happen every month, we send out an email with the link to the release notes, and informing about what has changed and all the different versions that are available and things like that. So one is a personal touch you can add via emails, The other one is also, obviously, you can use push notifications, in-app notifications, which tells you that, a new version is available and a new release has happened, and linked to the release notes. So I feel these are some ways you can reach out. And other than that, keep your community engaged all the time. And, if you have a forum where you are engaging with your customers, partners, I think that's also a great way to ensure that it's reaching out to your target audience.
Yeah, that's obviously the valid point. One more point that I would like to add from my side here is that, it's true that whenever a new release is there, it helps when you send a personalized email or a push notification. But many times you want to access those historical notes, like, I want to see release notes of a release which happened 6 months back. So that is also possible. Like in our tool, like I mentioned about automated release notes for Jira, we have a feature called widgets. So you can incorporate those release notes widgets within your application on any HTML page, whether it's a mobile app or a web app. And then that widget can be easily accessible on within your application for your users, where they can just go back to it and search for any historical content there. So widgets not just for the release notes, but also for the help documentation, which will be easily accessible. So that's again another way to make sure that it is accessible to the users.
Okay.
So yeah, so with this, we are coming to the end of this session. And before I let you go, lastly, any takeaways or tips from your side for the budding technical writers who are contemplating entering in this field?
Okay, let me see. I'll think of something that I wish someone would have told me when I started this journey.
Sure.
So these are for the budding technical writers, right? I would say never lose faith and never be disheartened by anyone who does not understand your role. You will come across many people, even senior people, even in companies that are fully established, where your role will not be fully understood. But your job is to be the customer's advocate, right? You be the person for the customer, look at things from a customer's angle and ask the right questions. Involve yourself in as many product development discussions and meetings as possible to get a complete idea. And remember that you are adding value to the end customer, and think that is of the most importance here.
Okay, all right. Again, thank you so much, Pema, for this wonderful discussion. I'm sure our audience must have gained valuable insights from this discussion. We focused on release notes in general, but definitely we also talked about the role of a technical writer in general at this beginning, also at the end. So thank you again for this wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Sujeet. Thank you so much for having me. And I'm so glad that, this series has started, because like I said, very less awareness about technical writing. I think these kind of discussions are going to be really good for the technical writing community. So thank you so much.
Great. All right. To the audience, thank you so much for watching this episode, and follow Amoeboids on YouTube or LinkedIn to receive updates of the future episodes of this series. See you in the next episode. Thank you so much. Bye.